Donnerschlag is a two-player operational game of medium complexity that recreates Operation Wintergewitter, the desperate attempt by Axis forces to liberate the trapped German 6th Army in the Stalingrad pocket in December of 1942. For this operation to be successful, the troops in the pocket had to break out and meet the advancing Axis troops. The breakout therefore had to be precisely coordinated with the advance of the relief troops and was to start on the cue Donnerschlag, which means in English, thunderclap. In this game, the Axis player will attempt to secretly establish and reach one of 3 meeting points, effectively freeing the 6th Army, while the Soviet player will try to prevent it. 1 hex equals 4 kilometers. 1 turn, 2 to 3 days. And a game lasts at the maximum 8 turns. Units are mostly brigades and regiments for the Soviets and Romanians, and battalions and Abteilungen for the Germans. The game includes one 21 by 34.5-inch mounted map board, 234 5/8 of an inch pre-rounded counters, 2 back-printed player aid charts, 2 setup displays, 126 cards divided in combat and activation decks for each of the sides, and 2 6-sided dice. Combat units in this game represent the military forces that took part in the historical campaign. The German units in this game belong to the 47th Panzer Corps, and you can tell them by their field gray background. There are Romanian units that belong to the 6th and 7th Corps, and then there are the units of Group Popescu, which has 2 cavalry divisions. On the Soviet side, units will belong to one of 2 armies, the 2nd Guards Army, and those units have a light red background, or the 51st Army, which have a tan background. This is a Romanian unit. It is the 92nd Regiment of the 18th Division of the Romanian 6th Corps. We have the unit type symbol, the combat strength, its movement allowance, and a dot denotes that it is a 1-step unit. In addition, we have the formation symbol in the bottom center, and this is important because sometimes units are activated by formation. Here we see a unit of the 51st Army as denoted by the tan background, and it has a blue horizontal line that runs from side to side. This is a color code that allows the unit to be activated if we play a card like the one shown here that allows the player to activate any blue unit of any of the 2 armies indicated in the card. Here we see the 3rd Battalion, 40th Regiment of the 17th Panzer Division. We see its unit type, which is motorized infantry, and a yellow combat strength. And the color means that it might contribute to a combined arms bonus. We see its formation symbol, and we also see movement color in yellow, and this is relevant for attacking or moving across rivers. Here we see a typical tank unit, the 2nd Battalion, 11th Regiment, 6th Panzer Division. It has a combat strength of 2 in a yellow and red box. The yellow coloring, as we stated before, means that the unit can contribute to a combined arms bonus. The red coloring means that the unit can provide a tank bonus. We see the formation symbol, and we see the movement allowance in a red hexagon. This means that the unit cannot cross rivers unless at a bridge hex side. We see also that it has 2 steps. In this game, the Axis has German Alarmgruppe Einheiten units, and these units can only be used for defense. Their combat value is in parentheses, which means that they cannot be used in an attack. But they do not count against the stacking limit, as shown by the symbol above their combat strength. In the counter sheets of this game, we can find that there's 2 counters per tank unit, one with a standard size silhouette and one with an optional style. They are identical, and the game provides the player the option of using one style or the other. And there's also headquarter units in this game. Sometimes units are activated through their respective headquarters. The command range of the headquarters unit is the maximum number of hexes a unit from its command can be from the headquarters to be activated. In this game, Soviet headquarters enter the game via an event, and Axis headquarters must always be on a road hex at the end of movement. Let's take a look at the sequence of play. First is the admin phase. The Schwerpunkt, or main effort marker, if available, is now placed on the map. Next, reinforcements are placed. Then, formation and combat cards are dealt to each player, and players can place cards in the Stavka or in the OKH box. In turn 4, and possibly in turn 8, we reshuffle and add formation cards and combat cards. Next, the German player can call out Donnerschlag. And finally, the Schlachtenglück, or combat luck marker, goes back to the Axis player. Next is the action phase, and here players resolve activations alternating between the German player that always goes first and then the Soviet player. And an activation consists of the following 4 steps. First, the player plays one activation card and activates units. Then he checks supply of the activated units only. Next is movement of the activated units, and then combat caused by the activated units. And if there are activation cards left in the hand, we return to step A. If there are none, we continue to the advance Donnerschlag marker step. And finally, we have the adjust turn track marker step. In this game, units are activated by the play of an activation card, and each side begins with 5 cards in their hand, which may be increased to 6. Both sides start the game with 5 combat cards in their hand, and this is also the hand limit, but it can be increased to 6 combat cards later during the game. All but 1 combat card must be played in each turn. 1 card can be kept for the next turn. Here we see a typical combat card. It has the epoch in which it can come into play. We have on the top a general event, when to play, the duration, its effect, and to the right we see the die roll necessary for successful play. The same for the tactical event in the bottom in orange, when to play, its duration, its effect, and the die roll that is necessary for successful play. Both sides have a highest command level, the OKH for the Axis and the Stavka for the Soviets. During the admin phase of a game turn, 1 combat card from a player's hand may be placed face down in the OKH or Stavka box. There's also a Schlachtenglück or battle luck marker, which the Axis player receives at the beginning of the game, but it can be used by both players in 2 ways. The player that possesses the marker can re-roll any of his die rolls, or he can use the marker to discard a card that has been dealt to him and replace it with a new card. And if the Schlachtenglück marker is played, it passes to the opposing player, and it always returns to the Axis player's hand at the beginning of each turn. Now this game uses an activation system which uses cards, and the cards give players options as to how to activate certain units, and it uses colors as well as headquarters and unit formations. On the Axis side, units from the Axis player can be activated in two ways. The Germans can activate formations, like we see here, the 23rd Panzer Division. You see the formation's symbol, which is the arrow pointing up, as well as the blue coloring. The card activates the formation's headquarters, and all units of that formation that are within its 4-hex command range can be activated for movement and combat. Other Axis activation cards, like the one shown here, allow the player to activate all units of either a German or a Romanian formation. Other cards, as the one shown here, allow the Axis player to activate only Romanian units. And some cards allow the German player to activate either one formation or use the Schwerpunkt marker, and this marker allows the activation of all units that are within command range of their respective formations in a 4-hex radius of the Schwerpunkt marker. On the Soviet side, activating units is slightly different. If a color code is indicated on the activation card, all units of that color in one of the armies indicated can be activated. And notice, for instance, that in this group of units that you can see here, only 2 units have the yellow coloring. And here we see 2 more units of the 51st Army that also have that yellow color code. Other Soviet activation cards, like the one shown here, allow the player to activate all units of a specific color of one of the Soviet armies or all units of one formation. So with this card, all the units of the 4th Mechanized Corps, which is indicated by the 4M notation in the bottom center of the counter, could be activated. And yet other activation cards allow the player to activate one headquarters of one of the 2 armies or all units in a particular formation. The Soviet player activates a headquarters, like the one you see here for the 2nd Guards Army, then all units that are within the headquarters command range, that is 3 hexes, could be activated for movement and combat. Now let's see how command range is traced in this game. Here we see the command range example found in the rulebook. The 6th Panzer Division's headquarters is activated. The 2/11 unit and the 6/6P are not hindered by the position of the Soviet unit. They can be activated even though the Soviet unit's zones of control are present within the command range. The 1/4 unit, however, is outside the activation range. It is at 6 hexes. The 1/114 unit is within range, so it can be activated. And the 2/128 belongs to a different formation, so it cannot be activated. However, notice that if the Schwerpunkt marker had been the source of the activation, and let's say it would have been placed in hex 3214, then all units that are within command range of their respective headquarters within a 4-hex radius could be activated. Let's go through the combat example found at page 9 in the rulebook. The example assumes that it is the Germans' turn and they play this activation card, which activates the headquarters of the 6th Panzer Division. So the German player can move all units of the 6th Panzer Division that are within the command range of their headquarters, that is, within 4 hexes. And as a result, the 3 German units of the 6th Panzer Division move to the positions shown here. The Axis player wishes to perform an attack with the stack comprised of the 111 and 114th of the 6th Panzer Division, which is the activated formation, against the hex containing 2 Soviet units of the 13th Tank Corps. The 2/114th, which is also of the 6th Panzer Division, is also adjacent to the target hex, and it can also take part in the same combat. The Romanian unit of Group Popescu, however, has not been activated, and it cannot participate in this combat, even though it's adjacent to the target hex. Next, the Axis player declares that he'll be using the Sturmpionier combat card's general event, and he has to roll 1d6, and the event will take place if he rolls 4 or less. And the roll is a 3, so he plays this event successfully, and this will remove it from the game after we finish this combat situation. And this card helps negate the penalties for attacking across a river hexside. Notice that without the successful play of this event, the 1/11th unit of the 6th Panzer Division would not be able to attack across an unbridged river hexside because it has its movement allowance printed on a red background. A Soviet player has a chance also to play a combat card and plays this M1937 card for its general event. And the Soviet player has to roll a 3 or less with 1d6. But the roll is a 5, and the Soviet player fails to play this card, so this card is discarded, and it is placed in the combat card discard pile. Now the Axis player adds up the combat strengths of his attacking units for a total of 6, and the Soviet player adds up his units for a total of 4. So the total attacker combat strength is divided by the defender strength. 6 to 4, which is simplified to 1.5 to 1. Let's take a look at the applicable modifiers. Here we see that in normal circumstances, the unbridged river hexside provides a -1 die roll modifier. But because the Axis player successfully played the Sturmpionier card for its general event, that modifier does not apply. Notice that the 111 and the unit beneath the 1/114th are tank and motorized infantry units respectively, so the attacker receives a column shift to the right for Axis combined arms. And in addition, the 111 is an attacking tank unit, and that provides an additional column shift to the right. On the Soviet side, the 13th and the 62nd Brigades are tank and motorized infantry units respectively, so the Soviet player also receives a column shift to the left. And notice that the 13th/13th tank unit does not provide a tank bonus for the Soviets because the tank bonus only applies on the attack. So it's a net 1 column shift to the right, and the attack will be resolved on the 2 to 1 column, and we roll 1d6. And the roll is a 6, and the result is 1dr, meaning that the Soviets lose 1 combat step, and they also have to retreat. And the Soviet player decides to eliminate the unit on the bottom of the stack, the 62nd Brigade. That is a single step unit as denoted by the single dot. And the surviving 13th Brigade retreats a single hex towards a friendly supply hex. and it is able to do so without entering any enemy zones of control or violating any stacking limits. An advance after combat is possible for the 1/11 unit, and it takes position in Hex 2413, which has just been vacated by the retreating unit. And finally, neither player chooses to play any additional combat cards for after combat use to the situation after the combat results are applied as shown here. Now with the code word Donnerschlag, the breakout of the 6th Army begins, and on any turn the Axis player may call out Operation Donnerschlag in its corresponding segment in the sequence of play. And here we see the sequence of play. It is in segment E of the admin phase that the Axis player each turn has to make the decision of calling out Donnerschlag or not. And once Operation Donnerschlag is called by the Axis player, he places this marker in the 0 box of the Donnerschlag advance track. And this means that later during the turn, during the advance Donnerschlag marker phase, the Donnerschlag marker will advance to the next box in the track. And the Axis player will have up to the 4th turn after Donnerschlag is declared to fulfill his victory conditions. Now let's say that during these turns, if the Axis player successfully plays this card, Le Flot 4, this card has the effect of allowing the Axis player to flip the Donnerschlag marker to its 6th Army survival side, and this allows the Axis player one more turn to complete his victory conditions, that is, until the marker reaches the number 5 box. When Operation Donnerschlag is declared, the Axis player has to select one of 3 meeting zones. That is the zone where the relieving forces will meet the forces breaking out from the cauldron. And the Axis player uses these markers to select one of the zones as the meeting zone. And the other dummy markers are also placed face down so the Soviet player does not know the identity of the meeting zone. And the meeting zones are these areas that you see here, labeled A, B, and C. For the Axis player to win, the Donnerschlag marker must be in box 4 of the Donnerschlag advance track, or in box 5 if the Axis successfully played the Le Flot 4 card, and the Axis player must have at least one Axis unit in supply and in command in the chosen meeting zone at the end of the turn. And if the Axis does not meet its victory conditions, then the Soviet player wins. We have the game set up. Let's take a look at the initial positions for each of the sides. We have a wide shot to show you the positions of the Axis relieving force. And these are units of Army Group Dawn, composed of German and Romanian formations. From left to right, we see here the German 6th Panzer Division, and you can tell by the formation symbol, the 2 X's, and the light blue coloring. Now, there's one independent armor unit that has been attached. The Axis player in this game has 2 independent units, and he can attach these to units at the beginning of the game. So one of those independent units has been attached to the 6th Panzer Division. And we see next the Romanian 6th Corps. Substantial number of Romanian units. And to the right we have the other Panzer Division that starts on the map, which is the 23rd Panzer Division. followed then by units of Group Popescu, which is a Romanian formation, mostly cavalry units. And then, on the far right, we have elements of the Romanian 7th Corps. The Germans have a reinforcement in turn 4, which is the 17th Panzer Division, and it enters through this hex 4605. The Soviet forces in the game belong to one of two Soviet armies, the 2nd Guards Army, and those are the units that have the light red background, and the 51st Army, which are the units with the tan background. And at the beginning of the game, there are 51st Army units, which are stretched thin in front of the German relieving forces. So you can imagine that the Germans will be able at the beginning to gain some momentum. And the Soviets have reinforcements that will enter during turns 2, 3, 6, and 7. Soviets already have some units that are approaching the front lines. And you see there elements of the 13th Tank Corps. They're a few turns away from reaching the forward positions. So in addition to the Russian forces that stand between the relieving and the surrounded forces, the Germans have to deal with certain natural terrain barriers. The Germans have a foothold on this river that you see here. There's a series of rivers between the positions of the relieving force and the surrounded Stalingrad defenders. Here we see the next river line, and in this game, armored units have to cross rivers at bridge hex sites, so that can funnel much of their movement in this game. And there is yet another river that we see here, and it is beyond this river that we find the 3 meeting zones. Nowadays, we see more uncertainty inserted into games than ever before. And this game has various elements of uncertainty, apart from the combat results table, which we're used to in all our war games. And we begin with the activation cards. So each time that you play this game, you're going to get a different mix of activation cards each turn, and that's going to dictate your strategy for that turn. But in addition to the uncertainty provided by the activation cards, there's also combat cards. And these combat cards create uncertainty on 2 levels. First, on not knowing which particular combat card your opponent has, but also on not knowing if the event that is trying to get triggered in this card will ever be played, because most of the events require a successful die roll. And although sometimes these die ranges are considerable, 1 to 4, there's always a chance that it will not occur. And you have events that can be played before combat and after combat. And there's also the uncertainty that rolling a particular result less than 1 or 1 for an Axis attack is going to bring Soviet ad hoc infantry units into the mix. And those are the units that we place in an opaque cup, and you can draw a unit, or you can draw a snafu marker, in which case the marker goes back into the cup and nothing happens. And the same happens for the Soviet player. If he rolls a 6 or higher, then the German player will be drawing from this cup, from which he can draw an alarm unit or also a snafu marker. So you have more uncertainty added into the combat's results table. And then there's the Donnerschlag track, which is a time clock against the Axis forces, and then the uncertainty as to which of the 3 meeting zones was selected, and of course only the Axis player knows this. And unfortunately this is a mechanic that is hard to replicate if you are trying to play this game solo. So this is Donnerschlag, Escape from Stalingrad, a game designed by Patrick Gebhart and Pepito Sbazzeguti, published by Vuca Simulations. And I hope that this video has given you an idea of the flow of the game and what the game has to offer. This is Stuka Joe, signing off for now. Thanks for watching.